Okay, this week we're working with sampled audio in multiple ways and looking at how we can create layers and depth to our projects. And first, we're going to start this time with a beat and work with a stock beat just for the sake of speed here. You could always make your own MIDI sequence of a drum instrument. But first, let's go ahead and load this beat here into our session here. I'm actually going to work in arrangement view first. If I get this in here, move this over here, and draw this out a little bit. And this week in class, we worked with beat repeat in the audio effects, which is a really fun way to get some variety and remix to your simple backbeats. So even if you're just creating a simple backbeat with a MIDI sequencer, you can create some awesome effects, or at least have a lot of fun with beat repeat. So what we did was we drug the audio effects. You can just search for beat in the delay and loop category and find beat repeat, and that will give you your basic beat repeat object. You can hear that it's listening for transients in your waveform or in the playback of your beat. This works best for percussion, really. And it is being triggered to repeat a certain sound over and over again. You'll see this light turn on. It's capturing that bass drum at certain intervals. So you can kind of fool around with these settings to get it to do what you like. But some of the fun things that we did was work with pitch decay. And what pitch decay will do is it'll drop the pitch as it repeats. Also, you can work with how we hear those sounds. So the insert mode will isolate just the repeats. Whereas mix will give you both the original and the repeats. And gate will give you only the repeated sounds. So that would be something to use only if you're like sending it to a certain effect. But we were kind of playing around with either of these. And what's also fun is to work with this chance dial and the repeat button. So the chance dial basically determines how likely it is to turn on its own and detect its own transients. What if we turned it all the way off? We now have the agency over when it repeats and when it doesn't. So this button becomes basically a control item for us. And two, you notice that it's kind of an abrupt deal, so I can turn on the decay value here so that it fades away. I can also add a filter and make it have more. And so as this goes, you can see how we're going to, we can work with different types of intervals. We can change the amount of rhythm per grid. Let me turn this on so it. Right, this knob will determine how fast those repeats occur. We can turn on no triplets to get a kind of a dynamic right? So what we did is we kind of played around with all these effects and different options to get an interesting mix. And let's see. So let me get something going here. I can turn on my filter a little bit. Kind of like the 16th notes one. So I can now perform this into my track. If I go back to my my device here on the other side, I can now start over and play this into the arrangement track, and it'll record all of my performances here. Okay, so I recorded a performance of me screwing around with beat repeat, and I've recorded it into the arrangement view. And that's kind of a lot of fun to do, really, and to kind of remix your own pulses. Notice that it's recorded all of my automation. And as it's recorded all my automation, you can see that my wave shape has not been changed. It's still the same drum beat as before. All my automation's been recorded here in the automation pane. We can also add other audio effects that aren't beat related, but are rather resonance related. And we can add a resonator to this, and that kind of turns it into a bit of a chord progression. Okay, so I have now a resonator that'll change my chords, or basically turn it into a comb filter. Also, I could change these settings if I want to. I can go from one to the other. Right, depending on the filter I use, it'll turn it into something else, chord-wise. So if I also load my sample back in here, I can bring this back into another track. And so I can double up my beat here. So I have two tracks. One's playing the dry sequence here, just the pulse, the original beat. And the other one is the affected one with all these stutters and other resonance that I've chosen here. So I can A-B them here. So let me play them, and I can A-B them. So this is the affected one. Right? So in the background is this beat here. And so let's say I want to use this region as an actual audio file. I can print the effects that I made from beat repeat and the resonator onto the waveform. To do that, I right-click on this region. I go down to Freeze Track, and Freeze Track will basically lock my settings for this track. And if I'm sure I want to confirm and print this as a WAV file, because there's no going back once you make it a WAV file. It replaces what you have and your effects with a WAV file with those effects printed in them. So I right-click on that. I go to Flatten, and it turns it into a WAV file that I can now play, and it is its own deal. Notice that the effects are in this file. All the stutters from beat repeat and the resonation. Right, so that's now a new waveform that I can manipulate down here. I can do other things with it, but essentially I've printed the effects from the audio processing into this wave. Now this track is fixed. If I bring in my original sound here and loop it against it, now I can mix together those two layers into a composite texture. Right, so you can see how this is now one instrument. Now that I've created all these layers for this one layer, taking my drummer and making 2 or 3 drummers out of this one drummer, I can go to Command G and group them into a track. If I select multiple tracks and Shift click another one, use the Command G function, I can group these tracks together. Grouping tracks is a great way to apply an effect to a group of tracks as if they were one. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an effect on our drumming group here. So I'm going to go back to effects, audio effects. I put delay on. I believe we could put some clean delay here. Some groove. How about that? And I bring that into my my first group here, which is drums. So now my drum instrument is made up of multiple layers with a unifying effect, right? I can also put reverb on there or what have you to make this all kind of gel. So I've got a layer of multiple, a group of things here. I can rename this drum group. Great. Okay. Next, we talked about how to incorporate. And notice that when you group things, it also groups in both sides of Ableton. Very useful. So I'm going to incorporate another sample. This is from outside of the program, and this is something I downloaded from the internet. It's basically this. Here, I'll drag it in here to a new clip slot. So notice that when I bring in any audio, it's going to warp it into the tempo for me. I can turn off warp, and it will be kind of free of that. Notice that if I don't select warp, it won't be aligned with my tempo. But if I do select warp, it brings it into it basically quantizes it. Right? I can tell it to loop. And it'll now loop along with it. Right. Another way to sample is to grab an instrument called Simpler and load it with a sample from outside here. So let's say if I bring that in here. And I load it with that sample. I click the warp button to again apply quantizing to it. I'll turn this one off. And I can go down to my MIDI editor, and now I'm triggering the playback of that sample. And what's nice about a sampler is I can now trigger this in a polyphonic fashion. I can copy and paste, or I can basically play it back in multiple octaves if I want to. I can, let's see, basically create a chord of this. Let me do maybe a perfect fifth up here. So if I solo this, oof, too much. So in this way, I'm creating a chord layer from the basically polyphonic sampling of the one sample. So this is just one. Let me sample this. That's by itself. And it's now in a chord over here because it's loaded into my sampler and triggered as an instrument as a C minor 7 chord, actually. Of course, I can put so I'm going to delete this one because I'd rather use the chord one, the multi-sample. So this is my C minor 7 chord. It is now looped in here. I'm going to put in some audio effects, maybe some reverb, and I could put in a resonator if I wanted to, if you think that's cool. Whatever you'd like to do to kind of make this sound, even more interesting than it is. Just add a little bit of reverb. If you add a resonator, that also kind of makes it sound cool. I could add this Berlin resonator before the reverb. So that's, again, more harmony, more complexity to your sound. So again, we're talking about kind of using things in tandem, and so you can duplicate this by option click and dragging this to duplicate your track, and putting another filter on here of some sort. Again, I wanted this before the thing, so I'm going to solo this one. And then, of course, we can group these together. Select them both, Command G, that turns them into a group. And now I can add a unique delay, maybe a grain delay to that. And nice thing about groups too is that you can trigger or solo each layer as a group. So this is my chords group. I can trigger this only. I can have the drums completely drop out. And as you add things, always remember that your master track over here is listening, and it'll show you when you've got too much signal. Cool. Okay, so we've got a couple groups. We're sampling. We're polyphonically sampling. And finally, we used a drum rack to sample something else. We go over to instruments. We go to our drums. We go to our empty drum rack. And we can take this sound here and drag it into our drum rack as a one shot, or as I'm just actually going to do a classic here. I'm going to isolate this part of it. And and again, I can turn that into a sample that I've triggered here. Because it's in a drum rack module, I don't get the opportunity to polysample this into a chord. It's basically a one-shot situation. And of course, I can add all these other things to it to make it exciting, or to change, to alter the sound. But essentially, we are kind of just trying to trigger this in its own way, right? As a non-pitched, or just as an extra element, a foreground element. Okay, so I think that's a little too fast. I'm going to make my loop now let's do 4 measures long. So it'll loop every 4 measures instead of every measure. So now that I've built my ensemble and I've got this going, I can now perform this into an arrangement view, and I can do so by triggering either scenes. I can make scenes with my groups like this. I can trigger them, turn them on and off. I can create a scene where we've just got vocals and this loop here. So I can go back and forth between no drums with drums. No voice. With voice. With drums. With partially affected drums. I'm option clicking and dragging to new scenes to copy. I can add my beat back in. So basically, we can record into our arrangement view a version of this, and this covers lots of different parts of this assignment. Of course, there's always the LFO, And the LFO is really useful as a kind of a, oops, not LFO. LFO finally is in our modulators, and we talked about this last week. We can drag in our LFO as a sine wave, which we can map onto pretty much anything. And for some reason, I'm not getting a whole lot of, here. Not sure where my wave is. Not sure why I'm not getting a proper wave. There it is. There we go. And again, you can apply your wave to pretty much anything. You can even map it to panning, like we were kind of doing in class today, or we can map it to having a little trouble with this. I'm not really sure why. There we go. There we go. That's how it goes. So now we can get a kind of this rhythmic wigwag of our pen. We can also track this to multiple places. We can map this to this here, or we can do this to pitch. We can map this to random pitch. Right? So you can activate any, or basically automate rhythmically any effect with your LFO. And you can, of course, change the frequency and the rate. Or the rate is the frequency, and the depth of your... and notice that these are all going at the same rate. You can duplicate your LFO and make it a different frequency. You can do multiple LFOs in a row. But those are really handy ways to automate your texture. So I look forward to hearing what we come up with this week. Keep building. See you soon.